get into STEM? How did you get into lasering? Tell us all about
Yeah, okay. Whew. I will try, but we will hit some points. So, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and so I've spent a lot of time in kind of creative spaces. I was lucky enough to be in creative fairly up in Bellingham, Washington, open-minded spaces where when I wanted to make stuff, I had access to my best friend's grandma, and she had a bunch of crafting supplies, and people never really questioned me enough to stop, right? Like, it's a very easygoing environment, and so I
it.
didn't feel too weird for just making whatever I felt like making as a teenager, and I started making some of the first things I gravitated towards was, like, costumey stuff, but for me, it was really I read so many fantasy books. I had and still have such an imagination and such like a low high boredom threshold. Like I really need to seek and do new and novel things that I was making. I remember my first pair of rainbow feathered wings that I made when I was like
Oh,
13
nice.
and wore to school. And I made jewelry all the time and I would braid things into my hair. And I had a best friend. And so we were doing this. And it was just this creativity machine when I was pretty young. And so,
Nice.
yeah, yeah, that really set me on a path. Yeah, I went to Burning Man when I was really young. Me and my best friend went when I was 15, and just to see that those options really young. I don't necessarily venerate the culture of Burning Man. It's not better than anything else, but it does, I think, for some people open the possibility of a couple directions, like just to exist without my phone or wallet or anything for a week and to experience gifting and to experience that level of indulging in your creativity and community, right?
Yeah.
Shaped me. So I started making and selling stuff, and when you do that, people wanna buy it. We're we
Yep.
function under capitalism. We are pre-programmed with, I think of money as a love language. It is the way that we know to show and prescribe value. And so from a very young age, I was playing the money game of
Mhm.
like, since I was making stuff and people liked it, they could give me money. And that is super evocative, way more evocative than the number of things I tried to get a degree in. I went to the Evergreen State College in Olympia, so that's no majors, no grades. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I just always felt most driven by and successful in making what I had in my head and then showing it to people and then selling it. So I did that for over a decade, pretty early on. And I moved from going to festivals because to sell stuff for me, it was really both online and event based. Because
Mhm.
this was
Yeah.
like at least a decade or more, 15 years ago now. So online sales were just kind of starting. Got in on Etsy really early, but selling things in person was really the thing. And I couldn't do a brick and mortar. So I was going to festivals at first, and then I started going to conventions. And there's just this is a whole events are a whole galaxy to me, right? And they kind of like you can go from like Comic Cons to the steampunk events that were happening back then to furry events. There's like some
Mhm.
really huge furry event, and I fucking love furries. Sorry, can I swear?
Yeah, you can totally
Okay.
swear. No, that's so funny because, like, I was talking to some people today this weekend who came into my booth, and we had, like, all of our little kits, like, our solderless kits and stuff up, and they
Yeah,
were like, "Do you go to any furry conventions? Because I think you would do really well at furry conventions." And I was like, "You're not the first person who's told that to me." Like,
of course, yes. I
yeah.
mean, the culture, they're like they have, for whatever reason, a lot of money. I think there's a lot of techies in that culture.
Mm,
There's a lot of
yeah,
money, and then this drive that does not give a fuck. They're like, "I'm going to live who I wanna be, and I'm gonna do it with all of my power," and I
yeah,
love that more than I can say.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so all of these niche events, and I always kind of just had to follow the survival hustle, right? I
Yeah.
both did it to survive internally, just
Mhm.
a lot of this larger structure in our culture, I doesn't really work for me, and I think doesn't really work for a lot of people, and we've all started feeling that more in the last couple years. I felt it keenly really early on. I'm like, "Well, none of this really fits. Fuck."
Yeah,
Running my own business, like, kinda creating my own reality, right? And
yeah,
then exploring all of these events, but also I always had to make enough money, and it just never I think you can understand this, it never stops. It's
yeah.
like it's a machine. It's I
It's an
think of
endless hustle.
it's the hustle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of it as, like, when I was the hustle, and
Yeah.
it was my identity, and it was my life. So, I do not regret a single fucking moment of that. Whenever anybody's like, "Don't do what you love for money," I'm like, "Fucking don't
Yeah.
agree, but, like, it's not a right, wrong thing." I that gave me just a ridiculous amount of skills, like, having done that for so long, because it doesn't
Mhm.
you can't encapsulate the range of things you need to learn. You just need to adapt and be successful all of the time. So that kept up with my, like, creativity and fast brain and was really good for me for a long time until it wasn't. And
Mhm.
I was spending too much time at home, like, just isolated in my room,
Mhm.
crafting because I was making all of my own merch. And I eventually, after making a lot of different things, I ended up with glowing clip-on cat ears. I have a pair here,
Nice.
and
Yes.
laser cut jewelry. So
Yes.
lasers when they were early, right?
I might be a fan of the laser cut jewelry that you make.
Yeah, I've been into that for a
Heck,
m Here's the cat ears.
oh my
There
god, so cute.
you can't really see them in this light, but they're glowing pink. Yeah, there you
Cool.
go, like that.
Oh
Yeah.
my god, those are awesome.
Yeah, so cat ears. Oh
I
man, is
can
the money in
see
cat
how they
ears.
would do super well at furry conventions too, like yeah.
Really? And so cat ears, absolutely everybody wants to own a pair of cat ears. I can tell you that. There is not a single human that I can't sell cat ears to. That's
Yeah,
why I like
yep, yep,
yeah,
absolutely. I
yeah.
mean, you put them up and I was like, "Oh, I need those."
I know. So how I got into making glowing cat ears. I was reading a webcomic in, like, 2007,
Mhm,
early MySpace time,
mhm.
and there was a character that was wearing a beanie with floppy cat ears, and I lost my fucking mind
Oh,
and
yeah.
started making fleece cat hats with ears on them
Mm,
around that time. And at that time, in, like, 2007, 2008, there was not a single pair of cat ears, like, not cat ear head hoods with scarves, right? Or
yeah.
the cat ear head like, metal headbands.
Mhm.
Those did not exist anywhere in any mall or any store. You couldn't buy them.
Crazy,
So,
crazy.
I made fleece hats with cat ears and made bank at the first anime convention I ever went to, SakuraCon. And again, me and my friend at the time, we were doing this together. So we were just compounded teenage girl energy, which you cannot stop. And like we would find out things like you can have a business license at any age and no one will stop you.
Right? That's awesome, yeah.
We were just getting into absolute mayhem, like very chaotic good. I still am. And from fleece beanie cat ears, I was like, well, people just want the cat ears. And so I
Mhm.
was attempting to make cat ears on headbands. Headbands are uncomfortable. I ended up with these on clips and put
Yes.
lights in them because I did. And the lights in here are tea lights. They're I don't know if we can
Oh,
see.
yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
are
Cool.
standard little twisty tea lights.
Nice.
So, how I got into laser cutting was a couple years later, I was working as a barista at a coffee stand. A guy came through my coffee stand, it was drive-through, and I was like, "What are you up to?" He's like, "I'm driving up to Canada for a magic show." I'm like, "Oh, you're a magician? I'm a juggler. We're mortal enemies."
Wait. Why are magicians and jugglers mortal enemies?
Because one shows you their tricks at all costs, and the other doesn't show you what they're doing at all costs, right? And so it's a
Interesting.
fundamental difference of opinion.
Interesting.
This is
Yes, I
really
can see
true,
that. Okay, yes, this makes sense. I like
but
it.
it's a way I've made many friends.
Mhm.
So we just immediately bonded. He gave me his card, and it turns out he was making magic tricks with a laser cutter. And this was in, oh man, 2011. So this is before hobby lasers.
Yeah.
And very soon after, I had been making jewelry forever, and I was like, I would give anything to make my own charms, like anything, right?
Mhm.
So I messaged him and we just hit it off, and I started sending him just pictures or line art.
Mhm.
I just had an idea of what lasers could do. I didn't design for them yet, but I could
Mhm.
make designs that were laserable. So we did that for years. That was how I did, like, runs of charms, and I found some
Cool.
from back then, so that era
Oh,
is
sweet.
very this kind
Oh,
of
nice.
I found out about
Ah,
right?
yes.
the Star Trek back then, because Paramount hadn't come back, and so now you can't really sell these. They've cracked
Right.
down, but back then there was nothing, and people lost their shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let is
Awesome.
was my bestseller for sure.
Cool.
Yeah, and I that's how I found out about a lot of materials because I'm like, well, colors.
Right.
How do? And I was just researching the shit out of materials for a long time. I was also going through. I think that I don't know. I've talked to a lot of small business owners and creators, and it drifts in this direction of we're using materials. Acrylic is plastic,
Mhm.
and our culture has like is really tied up around consumerism and plastic because we know that there's something wrong, but we don't know what to do about it. And
Mhm.
we're learning how to deal with that as individuals in a system where it's a systemic problem. So I wrestled with this for a while in using acrylic. I see a lot of people who laser cut strictly use wood and there's like this innate sense that cutting plastic is a bad idea. I don't agree, you don't agree, but I just think that's a funny conundrum that comes up all the time. Um
Well, and most of the wood is actually, like, mostly glue too.
yeah,
Right, it's
yes.
mostly
Yeah,
plywood
there's a
that
whole lot of gotchas. There is no right or wrong here.
yeah.
It's extremely complex, but for me, it played into I bring that up because I wrestled as a small business owner with aligning it with my values for ages
Mhm.
personally. And it did in many ways, but I ended up wanting to do other things eventually. I was both burned out on running my business, I was isolated all the time, I was exhausted of the hustle. I grew up in poverty trauma, so this was compounding that, having to
Mm.
survive like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I drifted in a direction of like, what can I'm an activist. I went to Evergreen. And so, well before 2020, I was doing several different protests. So, I eventually drifted in a direction of like, how do I change my life in a way that aligns more with my values and is more sustainable? And I was looking at becoming a therapist. I've been told over and
Mm.
over again I should be a teacher or a therapist. And there's just something in me that's like, no, I don't wanna do that. I know I'd be good at it, but it's also like, look at my face, like, I'm supposed to do that. Like, I like, I don't want.
Yeah, legit.
Yeah, and I met a partner. We've since drifted apart, but he had a massive effect on me because he was into open source, small scale,
Mm.
regenerative infrastructure, and he introduced me to a group called Precious Plastic,
Hmm.
which is if you haven't looked them up, they're just a
No.
phenomenon. I don't believe anything is a silver bullet, right? Like nothing fixes all of these big systemic problems we're in super easily, but we can affect the Overton window, like what we believe is possible or realistic. We
Mm.
can shift that culturally. And that's, I believe in that being a way change happens. And we've been seeing a lot of that in the last 3 years, this accelerated shift in reality. And it can be really destabilizing and like stressful, but it's also how new things happen. So I went in a direction all at once a couple years back in 2019. We built out a TriMet shuttle bus, which is one of the local metro shuttle buses,
Oh,
into the Magic Tool Bus, which was
nice.
our take on like a traveling open source show off vehicle where Sam could show off some of his like regenerative designs and I could tinker. It was like a makerspace slash living space.
Cool.
Yeah, it was really great. And at the same time, I went to a code boot camp, and that was my yeah. So I had to have several people. No, I had to have two men who were close to me. One was my brother,
Mhm.
and one was a friend. Just kind of be like, you should learn how to code. You should learn how to code. There's money in it. You should learn how to code. And I had
Mhm.
to have people close to me do that for a while before I could possibly wrap my head around it. There was so much in me that's like, not only can I not do that, there was the learned helplessness.
Yeah.
There's also a like, I'm I don't fit in that. That's not what I want. It's I've had a lot of conversations with people about this at this point, and I see a lot of I can't sit at a desk all day, or I can't stare at screens all day, or I'm not a computer. And I kind of had that in me too, right? Eventually I bent and I started looking at boot camps and I found that there are boot camps that try to make nods to inclusivity. The one
Hmm.
I came across that was really dope was the Ada Developers Academy in Seattle. Yeah, they're all femme queer, really
Cool.
good intern initiatives. They are dope as hell. They're harder to get into than MIT,
Yeah.
right?
I
So
imagine there's a lot of demand.
yeah, because they're effective.
Right?
So
Yeah.
I found a different boot camp here in Portland, and it failed me. I don't know about anybody else. It failed me pretty horrendously. It didn't give me a code job for sure, and I haven't really touched software all that much
Mhm.
since because of that boot camp, which is really sad, and I hope to rectify that at some point. But it gave me, a previous hustler, the shape of this industry. And then I felt once I understood what this cloud of like tech looks like, once I learned that there are positions that are like developer advocate where you just talk to both tech people and normal people, I
Yeah.
was like, oh no. And I was like a shark, right? I was like, oh, I smell blood in the water. Like I could do
Yeah.
anything. A lot of this industry is hubris in my experience.
Indeed. Indeed.
So I poked around for a while. It was really stressful at the end of 2019, being jobless, not knowing what's going to happen. I landed the job at Crowd Supply. And at the time, it was all in person in an office here in Portland. We've gone fully remote. So the pandemic hit a month and a half
Yeah.
into me getting that job.
Jeez, wow.
And
Trial
it
by
took this
fire.
job where I had coworkers and I would leave my room
Yeah.
and it stuck me right back in my room. It was
Uh,
like, I'll take it, right?
right.
Like I've been making stable remote money. Like I'll take it.